Hello everyone, welcome to our first tutorial for Grasshopper. And first, let's turn on Grasshopper. You can open it by clicking the icon here, or you can simply type in Grasshopper in the command line. And then here we go. And if you want to make a new file, you don't have to do anything other than click new document. But of course, when I open it up, it already had a document there. And then the very handy thing about Grasshopper is that you can come over to the top right corner and click different documents. Right now, they are all blank, so it looks like similar, but they are actually different documents, which is very handy. Unlike Rhino, you have to close a file and open a new one, or switch in different tabs on the bottom. You can just simply click here. So let's go on the top row, file, which is straightforward, some recent file, save, document, so on and so forth. And they have special folders, which have some of the plugins that we installed in the Grasshopper system. And the second one, which is also very straightforward, there are paste, cut, copy, redo, so on and so forth. I barely ever use them. And the next thing I will show you is a view. This will basically give you control over different kind of display mode for the tabs and components. Okay, and then the next thing we will show is a display. This will show you the views and everything of the icon and everything. So for example, if I put a Grasshopper component here, right, and then I will come over here, and if I click off the draw icons, then it will just become a PT. It's like a shortcut of this thing called point, right? But if I come over here and say draw icon, it will show me this icon as like a point. And then the draw fancy wires and everything, most of those things I never really play with them. If you are interested, you can definitely, absolutely play with them. And in terms of the preview setups, we will talk about it in a second. And then solution, to be honest, I never really use this because when you right click your cursor on the blank part, you'll get the same thing, right? That's where I usually get the access of the log solver and recompute from. And then the next one is just help, right? Just have tutorial files and everything. And you can actually learn everything by yourself by accessing those files. It will have the notes and we'll have a setup thing for you, which you can learn a lot of stuff. Okay, let's go back to our empty folder. And then the next thing is the key for Grasshopper is this kind of tabs that including all the components, all the solvers for you to use. So the first one is parameters. They have like points, they have circle, they have curve, so on and so forth. They have perhaps, or they have surface. Okay, you don't have to understand what it means right now, but all you have to know is that if you make an object in Rhino, and then if you want to process it in Grasshopper, you have to use this kind of parameters as a bridge in between. So if you select this icon, right, and right click it, okay, and then select set one point, you get this point, and then now you can start to play with it. Okay, so before that, Grasshopper and Rhino, their files are totally separated. If you want to read a file from Rhino into Grasshopper, you have to have this kind of parameters as kind of bridge to connect in between. And then Rhino always have priorities in this kind of situations. If you change the file in Rhino, the Grasshopper will read the file based on your changes and have no delays in between. Okay, so basically this is just an introduction tool to bring files from Rhino to Grasshopper. And then the next tab is math. It just tells you different kind of operations, like addition, okay, multiplication, and division and minus, right? And there are all kind of functions or formulas you can use, right? You can calculate the square, you can calculate the root, and then you can calculate the power, so on and so forth. There are all kind of different operations you can execute inside of this calculation, okay? And also there are some complicated stuff like construct a domain, and then you can plug some numbers in, and we'll give you a domain, which will bring us to another topic in Grasshopper, which is there's, for example, for this component specifically, it is called domain. Once you float your cursor on the icon, right, you will get the access to the description of this specific component. For example, this one is called construct domain. So its function will be create a numeric domain for two numeric extremes. For example, right now I will left click the empty space or blank part on the canvas. I will type in 2.5, okay? So I get slider, and the slider is 2.5. It has, you can drag something out of this left part and then plug it into the right. And then, so I will just make another one by left click the canvas. I will say 5.5, okay? And then I will plug this part into the domain. Then this one is called domain start, and this one is called domain end. And then I will go to the parameters. I will find a thing called panel. It's basically just read what the output is. And then you see that there's an output is called 2.5 to 5.5. And if you change it, right, it becomes 5.7 to 5.5, which doesn't make any sense mathematically. Usually we put a smaller number on the left, but it doesn't really matter. It just gives you a domain or a range if we are talking about in Python. Okay, so this is basically the most fundamental things for Grasshopper in terms of its component. It always have a input sets and always have an output set. Sometimes it can be multiple input and multiple outputs. So you don't have to be limited by this 2-to-1 relationship. Okay, so those are the math, right? And then the next part will be the sets. Well, this is a little bit more complicated, but long story short, a sets is a set of components that is used to control the data distribution or data structure within the system. It's a very complicated topic, and we're going to spend a lot of time in our tutorial. But right now, you just have to remember that this is just some ways we can call or manipulate certain data structure within Grasshopper. And the next part is vector. Well, it's straightforward. A vector, the most fundamental thing is just like an arrow that has length and directionality. It will tell you where to start and where to end, right? But also it has some tabs have different kind of things. For example, this one is like a field. You can play with all kind of like forces inside. And then this one is a grid, right? I mean, this vector here is not just about the directionality or a arrow. It's also a vector that we usually talk about in Illustrator, right? You can draw something based on this kind of pre-setup. For example, if I want to make a square, I will just select here, and then you can play with the starting point. For example, if I want to start the square from here, I will come over here, hit the point, right click, and set one point. I will choose this point and then bring it in. So the starting origin for this, the plan, right, where all the grid start, will move to here. And then this part is size, right? Use this to control the size of the grid cells, right? We can make it bigger or smaller. And then there's this extend X or extend Y, which is control the number of grid cells in base plane X direction. So how many cell we're going to have in this direction? Right now, the default is 5 by 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So if we make it 7, right, this will immediately change. Okay, so vector has all kind of different tabs also. Like you can process a plan, you can process the point, and the one curve is just a bunch of components that you can use to manipulate your curves. You can divide them, or you can get their ending points, so on and so forth. And all the components you need for surface are embedded here. And mesh and intersect. Intersect is a very interesting one. A lot of time you have to calculate the intersections between different objects, right? Those are the ones you can find here. For example, if you want to find some intersections between two curves. For example, we can draw two curves here. I'll just come over here and select one curve. And again, select another curve, right click, select this curve. I will plug this one in and then plug this one in. And automatically it will show you this point here, which is the intersection in between those two curves. So those two parameters are actually very complicated concept. We're going to introduce it later. So if you want to get this point in this real world, right, you have to right click it and then hit bake. And then it will allow you to group them or put them into different layers or whatever. So usually it's more than one object you can bake. So you can group them into different groups or put them in different layers. But right now it's just one point, so I don't have to do anything. Again, which remind you another thing is that anything that you created in Grasshopper, you cannot select it or deselect it in Rhino. You simply see the display. You cannot do anything until you bake it. There are two different ways to bake it. First, you use the middle click, and then you can just bake this here. And then you will get it, right? You'll get like a bunch of grids or a bunch of squares, okay? Or another way to do so is, as what I introduced before, floating to the icon that you want to bake specifically, you right click it, and then you will hit bake. And this time you have more options. You can bake them to a specific layer, or you can bake them to a specific group, okay? So that's all you need to know about the mesh and intersect. Okay, the next one is transform. Again, in a lot of time, you have to scale, or you have to project, or you have to rotate things in Grasshopper. All those actions can be found in Grasshopper under the transform tab. The next one is display. Of course, you want to show your grid or the file you have generated in different colors. This is the part you can play with. Okay, so the rest of it, most of them are just plugins. So basically, Grasshopper is a plugin for Rhino, but because it's so handy, a lot of people develop their own plugin for Grasshopper. So this kind of things are like plugin for the plugin, which is a little bit tricky. And then the next thing I want to show you is just this tab here. I will talk from the left. The left is pretty straightforward. For example, let me make a sphere first, okay? I believe sphere is right here. And you come over here again, and you can see that you can now select anything. And if you highlight it, you select this one specifically, the sphere will show in green in Grasshopper. And then if you want to change the center of this wrap, you can just come over here and select new point and then drag it in. So you will move it here. The next thing you will do is you will change the radius. Let's say 22.2, and then I'll just plug it in, and then I can play with it. So this kind of action shows you the strength of parametric design. Although this is just one component, two inputs, you can make a lot of changes by simply sliding this slider. And slider, there's something more I want to talk about. It's just once you click in, you can change the digits, right? You can change it to a number of decimal places by sliding this one. This right now it's an integer. If you change it to 0, right, it can only do 19 or 21. But if you change it to one digit, then it will be floating numbers. Okay, so on and so forth. And then also you can change it to even number or odd number. So if I change it to even number, I can only do 32 or 34 or 36, so on and so forth. And also you can set up the minimum and the maximum value, this kind of range within this. The next thing I want to talk about is just something you usually use. It's just view entire document. It will just zoom out of everything. For example, I'm looking at here, and if you want to zoom out everything, you will just click here. And also this will just add name views, which is I don't really use it. It's kind of like save this specific view here, right? And I don't really use it at all. And the last thing, create the new sketch object. You can put a notes here, right? Like so on and so forth. Or you can explain something by drawing something here, right? So yeah, I don't really use this neither. But if you come to the right part, which is the display mode, you can click here, hide everything. Don't draw any preview geometry. Or you can put a wireframe here, right? For a sphere, the only wireframe is just a curve or arc. And then you can draw this thing in a solid manner. Or you can come over here. You can preview the boundary, which I never use. Or you can, again, draw the geometry only for the select object. If you click it, I will only draw geometry for this one. And I will only draw the geometry for this one. If I unclick it, everything will disappear. Okay, so which I don't really use it at all neither. And then this one is document preview settings. It's like, for example, if you unselect something, it will turn to red. And if you select something, it will turn to green, right? We talked about here. If I select this, it will turn to green. And how do you change the color settings? You can change it here by dragging this color into it and then hit OK. And then once I select it, it will become this pinkish color. The last thing is just preview mesh quality. If you make it very low, it's just polygon-like. If you make it very high, it just looks smoother. We don't see any necessity of applying this low quality here because it's just a simple sphere and our graphic card and memory is actually pretty good. Also our CPU. But if it's a lot of objects, this might come handy. So that's all I want to know about the basic interface for Grasshopper. But then let's come to the canvas. We talked about it before. If we left click it, we select some object. If we click the blank part, we get a deselection of everything else. And then if we middle click it here, we can group things together. For example, if I want to, and of course, select from right to left, it's select everything you have touched. So, and we can group certain things, just so on and so forth. And if you want to lock everything, you can just disable the solver. It will lock every calculation. Sometimes if you realize you made a mistake or you are worried about so on and so forth, you want to stop the calculations all the way from the beginning to the end, you can just enable or disable the solver, right? Again, this is Baker, and this is enable or disable. For example, for this calculation specifically, if you are trying to stop it from calculating, you can just disable it by doing so. Now it is just, you see the color has already changed. If I enable it, you see that enable is this color, disable is different color. Okay, what if I stop all the input? Right now it has an arrow. It says that this object contains 2 warnings. It means that it stopped calculating, right? Turn to this orange warning color. And then if I enable the input again, it will come back to normal, this like white or grayish color. Okay, so that's pretty much everything you have to know for the like displays for the components. The last thing I want to show you again is right click it. You can preview, enable, bake in a different manner. Again, a lot of things are just repetitive, and but they have certain difference over the details of controlling. The last thing I want to talk to you about is the search tab. If you want to find some specific components, but you don't remember where is it, you can just use search. For example, like addition, you can just type in ADD and you can search this thing. And also if you find another file that you made before, or you find it from other people and you want to know this specific like component, where is it? For example, this one, I hold Control and Alt same time and I click it, it will show me where is it. Okay, and also about Alt, you can also hold the Alt and then drag left and right will give you some more space in this process. Also, if you select this specific component first and then hold Alt, you can drag it around by copying it, right? The order does matter. If you hold Alt first, you cannot select anything. You can just get more space on canvas. If you hold the components first and then hit Alt, it will just give you the ability to drag it around. Okay, Thank you so much. That's everything you need to know for Grasshopper in terms of its interface. And I will see you in the next tutorial.